You want to know about power? Real power isn't commanding armies or bending centuries to your will. Real power is loving someone so completely that losing them doesn't destroy you, it just makes you wish it had. That's what I learned after 847 years of existence. That's what she taught me. My name is Draco Nightshade, King of the Northern Territories, and this is the story of how I chose wrong. Write this down, Helena. Every word. Because this isn't a tale of conquest or glory. This is about June Winters, a human woman who made me believe in warmth again, and how I let fear turn that warmth to ash. I met her on the autumn equinox, 3 years ago now, though sometimes it feels like yesterday and other times like another lifetime entirely. I was walking through the Moonvale Gardens, the castle's private night-blooming sanctuary. We've cultivated those grounds for centuries. Ghost orchids from the eastern reaches, nightshade roses from the borderlands, Luna bells that only open under a full moon. Most humans don't even know such places exist, but there she was, crouched beside my rarest ghost orchids with a leather-bound notebook, sketching their structure by moonlight, her brown hair falling forward to hide her face, completely absorbed in her work. I should have been angry. The inner territories are forbidden to humans under the Separation Accords, the treaty signed in 1823 that keeps our species apart for everyone's protection. Humans fear what they don't understand, and vampires have learned that proximity breeds dangerous complications. Instead, I found myself curious. "Those are poisonous to mortals," I called out, staying in the shadows of the garden arbor. She didn't even look up, only if ingested. I'm a botanist, not an idiot. Then she raised her eyes to meet mine, and I remember thinking she should have been afraid. Humans who accidentally cross into vampire territory usually run or freeze, their hearts hammering loud enough for us to hear from 50 paces. But June Winters just smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with soil-stained fingers. "You must be the king," she said, as casual as if we were meeting at a market. "I submitted a research request 6 months ago to study your night-blooming collection. Never heard back. We don't typically grant humans access to the inner territories." "Then I guess I should work fast before you kick me out." She turned back to her sketching, and I stood there in the darkness, utterly disarmed. I should have escorted her to the border immediately. Should have reported the breach to my advisors, should have done 1,000 things that weren't what I actually did, which was sit down on the stone bench beside her and ask about her research. She told me about nocturnal pollination patterns, about how certain flowers have evolved to bloom only in darkness because their pollinators, moths, bats, night-flying insects, only emerge when the sun sets. She spoke about adaptation and survival with such genuine wonder that I found myself seeing my own gardens differently, as if through new eyes. "The night-blooming world has its own complete ecosystem," she said, carefully shading a petal in her sketch. "Most people never see it because they're asleep, but it's just as alive as the daylight world. Maybe more alive, because everything happening in darkness feels more intentional somehow. These flowers chose the night. I'd never thought of it that way. In 8 centuries, I'd never considered that the night could be a choice rather than a curse. We talked until the sky began to pale in the east. I stayed deep in the shadows of the arbor where the coming dawn couldn't touch me, while she packed up her supplies with efficient, practiced movements. "You should go," I told her. "Sunrise in 20 minutes. Will you be here tomorrow night? This is my garden. Then I'll see you tomorrow." She walked away without waiting for permission, and I remained sitting there long after she'd gone, until Thomas, my castle steward, came to inform me that sunrise was imminent, and I really should move to safety, my king, if it's all the same to you. She came back the next night, and the night after that, and the night after that. For 2 weeks, we met in those gardens while she documented my collection. I brought her books from my library, botanical texts from the 1600s, preservation techniques, illustrated manuscripts that no human institution possessed. She brought questions, observations, that peculiar human enthusiasm that makes everything seem newly discovered. Marcus, my chief advisor, thought I'd lost my mind. "My king, this sets a dangerous precedent," he said, pacing my study while I pretended to review territorial reports. "Humans in the inner territories violate the accords. The Council of Elders won't approve. She's studying plants, Marcus, not plotting insurrection. The other territory kings will hear of this. They'll question your judgment. Then it's fortunate I don't answer to them." But that wasn't entirely true. The Council of Elders oversees all 7 vampire territories across Europe. They're the ones who enforce the ancient laws that keep our society functioning, the blood right codes that govern our hierarchy, the turning protocols that regulate how humans become vampires, the separation accords that maintain the boundary between our species. As a sitting king, I had autonomy within my own lands, but I wasn't above the council's authority. I was simply choosing to exercise my autonomy in a way that would likely draw their scrutiny. I didn't care. By the 3rd week, research sessions had become conversations. June told me about her human life, her best friend Violet, who made her laugh until she cried, her 3-year-old nephew who was learning to speak, her parents, who worried she spent too much time with plants and not enough with people, normal things, mortal things, the kind of details that fill up a human life and mean everything because that life is so brief. I told her about vampire politics, about the endless territorial negotiations and the rigid structure of our society. Elders at the top, ancient vampires over 1,000 years old who've seen empires rise and fall, then territory kings and queens like myself. Below us, the high-born families who trace their bloodlines back to the old wars. Then common vampires, those born to vampire parents but without prestigious lineage. And at the bottom, the turned humans who'd been converted, never quite trusted by those of us born to this life. "Seems lonely," she said one evening, looking up from a Luna bell she was examining. "All that structure. It's necessary. Without order, we'd descend into the chaos that nearly destroyed us during the old wars. But when was the last time you had a conversation that wasn't about politics or protocol?" I thought about that. "Before tonight? I can't remember." She smiled then, soft and a little sad. That's what I thought. 3 months after we met, I realized I was in trouble. I started noticing small things. The way she hummed while she worked, always the same melody, some human song I didn't recognize. How she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, an unconscious gesture that happened every few minutes. The small scar on her left hand from a greenhouse accident in her university days. The fact that she always smelled faintly of earth and living things, even here in my garden of night-blooming specimens. Vampires don't feel emotions the way humans do. Our feelings are muted, controlled, filtered through centuries of experience. We have to be this way when you live as long as we do. Letting yourself feel everything would drive you to madness. The weight of accumulated grief and joy and rage would crush you. But around June, I felt everything. Her laughter made something in my chest expand. Her thoughtful silences felt comfortable rather than awkward. When she looked at me with those earnest brown eyes, asking about vampire history or culture with genuine curiosity, I found myself wanting to tell her things I'd never told anyone. 6 months after we met, on a cold winter evening with snow falling beyond the garden's protective enchantments, I asked her to stay. "Move into the castle," I said, the words coming out more abrupt than I'd intended. "Not as a researcher, as my guest. There are entire wings you haven't seen, libraries, conservatories. The Winter Gallery has windows that face north. You could watch the aurora from there. You could continue your work here." She set down the plant specimen she'd been examining, turning to face me fully. "Draco, what are we doing?" "I don't know, but I don't want to stop. I'm human. I know. You're a vampire king. Also, aware of that, yes." She laughed, but it was shaky. "This is insane. Probably. She was quiet for a long time, snow falling silent and pristine beyond the garden walls, the Luna bells chiming softly in the night breeze. Then she said, "I'd need to visit Violet on weekends, and my family for holidays. I can't just disappear from my human life. Done. And when I'm ready, if I'm ready, I want to turn. Become like you, but not yet. I need 5 more years as human. Maybe more. Is that okay?" My heart, dormant for so many centuries, seemed to beat for the first time in ages. "June, I've waited 800 years for something real. I can wait 5 more years, 10, however long you need." She moved closer then, reaching out to touch my hand where it rested on the stone bench between us. Her skin was warm, alive, her pulse visible at her wrist. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, yes." She moved in the following week. Those 18 months were Helena. I don't have adequate words for what those months were. If I'd known they were all I'd get, I would have paid more attention. I would have memorized every moment, instead of assuming we had endless time ahead of us. June transformed the East Wing into something I'd never seen in my castle before. She filled it with living plants, growing things that needed tending and care. Vampires don't typically bother with such things. We appreciate beauty, but we don't need life around us. We are separate from it in fundamental ways. But suddenly my ancient stone halls had green things growing, and the air smelled different, richer. Like earth and possibility. She befriended the castle staff, which was something no human had ever done before. Most of them were common vampires who'd served my family for generations, invisible, efficient, never expecting personal attention from the king's household. But June learned their names, asked about their lives, remembered details. Thomas, my castle steward, came to me one evening with an odd expression on his weathered face. "My king, if I may speak freely?" "When have I ever stopped you, Thomas?" Miss June asked about my daughter today. Remembered it was her turning day anniversary, the anniversary of when she became vampire. Even brought a gift. A cutting from one of those night-blooming roses, planted in a pot with instructions for care. "That's thoughtful of her." He hesitated, then said, "The castle feels different, sire. Lighter somehow. The staff are smiling more. Even old Marcus seems less dour." I looked up from the correspondence I'd been reading. "Is that a problem?" "No, my king. Just an observation. We're all rather fond of her." After he left, I sat in my study and realized he was right. The castle did feel different. For centuries, it had been a seat of power, a stronghold, a place where decisions were made and order maintained. Now it felt almost like a home. June made me different too, though I didn't fully recognize it at the time. I started leaving my study more often, attending events I'd normally have delegated to advisors. She wanted to experience vampire culture, so I took her to the Moonfall Festival, where vampires gather to celebrate the longest night of the year. To the Blood Moon Galas, where territory leaders dance ancient dances under crimson skies. I taught her the steps to the Nocturne Waltz, laughing when she stepped on my feet and didn't apologize. I taught her Old Vampiric too, our language that predates most human tongues. We use it for formal occasions, sacred rituals, intimate moments. She struggled with the pronunciation, the guttural sounds that don't exist in human languages. "Lumea mea untunicata," I told her, my dark world. She tried to repeat it, mangling the vowels, making it sound almost like a different phrase entirely. Then she grinned at me and said it wrong deliberately, and I found myself laughing, actually laughing in a way I hadn't in decades. Vampires don't laugh much. Humor requires a certain lightness of spirit that centuries tend to leach away. But June brought laughter back into my existence, like she brought living plants into my castle, stubbornly, persistently, until it seemed natural again. We made plans during those months. Real plans for a future together. She'd finish her doctoral research first, another 3 years of field work and writing. Then she wanted to travel with Violet for 6 months, see parts of the world she'd only read about, visit her nephew while he was still young enough to remember her as human, experience her mortal life fully before giving it up. Then, when she was ready, I would turn her myself. The process is sacred among our kind. The bite, the exchange of blood, the 3-day transformation, while the human body dies and reforms into something new. The turned one must be guided through it by someone who cares for them. The alternative is madness, a vampire with no anchor to their former humanity. I'd never turned anyone before. In 800 years, I'd never wanted to share my existence with another being so completely. You sound almost happy, my king. I am. Is that allowed? He smiled, rare for him. It's encouraged, actually. We thought we had time. That was our mistake, thinking mortal years and vampire patience could coexist without consequence. We thought 5 years was nothing. A blink, barely worth counting. We were wrong. The Winter Solstice Council meeting happened 18 months after June moved into the castle. Every season, the 7 territory kings and queens gather with the Council of Elders to discuss interterritorial matters. Border disputes, trade agreements between territories, enforcement of the blood right codes. It's bureaucracy mostly, tedious, but necessary to maintain peace among our kind. This meeting seemed routine. We convened in the Grand Council chamber, a vast hall carved from black stone, older than any vampire present. The obsidian table in the center had witnessed 8 centuries of negotiations, alliances, betrayals. King Alexander of the Eastern Reaches sat to my left, ancient and sharp-eyed. Queen Morgana, of the Southern clans, across from me, beautiful and calculating. King Theron, of the coastal territories. Queen Isolde, of the mountain holds. King Casimir, of the borderlands. Queen Seraphine, of the northern wastes. And me. Presiding over us were the 5 elders vampires over 1,000 years old, their faces like carved marble, their eyes holding the weight of genuine antiquity. Elder Constantine, Elder Marius, Elder Alessandra, Elder Nikolai, Elder Chen. They rarely spoke during these meetings, simply observed and voted when major decisions required their authority. We were discussing a trade dispute over blood supplies, synthetic blood production rights, tedious details that required attention but not passion. When the chamber doors opened without warning, Seer Miriam entered. The conversation died instantly. Seers are rare among vampires, Helena. Maybe 1 in every 10,000 has the gift. They can touch the threads of time itself, see probabilities branching like tree roots, speak prophecies that reshape the future by their very utterance. We don't summon seers. They come when the visions demand it, and their arrival always means something significant is about to change. Miriam was ancient, 1,500 years old, her white hair falling past her waist. Her face seemed with age that vampires rarely show. I'd seen her perhaps 3 times in my entire existence, always during moments that altered the course of history. Seer Miriam, Elder Constantine said, his voice formal but wary. We did not request your presence. I come because I must, she replied, her voice hollow, distant, already half removed from our reality. She walked to the center of the chamber with slow, measured steps. The other kings and queens drew back, slightly instinctive caution around a seer in the grip of vision. Then her eyes went white. Completely white. No iris, no pupil, just blank silvery whiteness that reflected the torchlight like mirrors. When seers enter true vision, they're no longer looking at our world. They're looking at all possible worlds simultaneously, seeing the branching paths of what might be. I see the nightshade line, she said, but it wasn't her voice anymore. It was something older, speaking through her. I see the king who rules in shadow. I see the human woman who warms his cold halls. My blood went cold, metaphorically speaking, as it's always cold. She was talking about June. She is the end. The human woman who shares the Nightshade King's bed, she will be the end of him. The end of this bloodline. The end of this dynasty. The end of this territory as all know it. The end. The end. The END. The last word echoed through the chamber like a thunderclap, and then Miriam collapsed, the vision releasing her all at once. 2 attendants rushed forward to catch her before she struck the stone floor. The chamber erupted. "This is unprecedented," Queen Morgana said sharply. "A human causing a territorial collapse," King Theron added, looking at me with barely concealed contempt. "Draco, you must address this immediately," King Alexander said, and at least his voice held concern rather than condemnation. "Silence," Elder Constantine commanded, and the room fell quiet instantly. He turned to me, his 1,000-year-old eyes like chips of ice. "King Draco, you harbor a human within your inner territory. This prophecy clearly concerns her." "June is a botanist," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "She's not a threat to anyone. Seer Miriam has never been wrong. Not once in 1,500 years. If she says this human will end your territory, then she will end your territory. Send her away," King Casimir said coldly. "Tonight, before whatever doom she carries manifests. Or turn her immediately," Queen Seraphine suggested. "A vampire cannot end a vampire territory." The prophecy specified human woman. "The turning protocols are clear," Elder Constantine said. "Forced conversion voids the bond. She must choose willingly, and she must be ready. Turning someone prematurely often results in madness." "June has chosen," I said. "In 5 years she'll turn and none of this will matter." "You may not have 5 years, King Draco." The weight of his words hung in the air. The other kings and queens watched me, with varying degrees of sympathy and suspicion. "We do not command you," Elder Constantine continued, "but we counsel strongly. Distance yourself from this human. Investigate what end she brings. If she is innocent of malicious intent, you may resume your association. If not, then steps must be taken to protect the territory." "You expect me to exile her based on a vague prophecy?" "We expect you to protect your territory. That is your sworn duty as king. Your personal attachments, however genuine, cannot supersede that responsibility." The meeting ended shortly after. Procedural matters were rushed through. No one's attention truly on trade agreements or border disputes anymore. They were all watching me, waiting to see what I would do. I returned to my castle. While June was asleep, she kept human hours mostly, sleeping through the day, waking at sunset to spend evenings with me. I went directly to my study and sat in the darkness, trying to think logically about what I'd just witnessed. The prophecy. She will be the end of him. The end of this bloodline. This dynasty. This territory. As all know it. What did that mean? How could June, with her plant sketches and her gentle nature and her terrible attempts at speaking old vampiric, end anything? Would she betray me somehow? Impossible. I knew her heart. Would she die, and my grief would destroy me? Possible. Vampires who lose their chosen ones sometimes descend into madness. I'd seen it happen ancient vampires who'd loved mortals, watched them age and die, then spent centuries as hollow shells of themselves until they finally walked into sunlight. Would her humanity make me appear weak to the other territories? Would rivals see my attachment to a mortal as vulnerability and move against me? King Theron had always coveted my northern forests. Queen Morgana wanted access to my mountain passes. Maybe they'd use this as justification for territorial challenges, legal maneuvering within the council's frameworks that could destabilize everything I'd built. I spiraled through possibilities as the night wore on, each scenario more dire than the last. My mind, trained over centuries to anticipate threats and planned contingencies, turned against me, showing me every way this could end in catastrophe. By dawn, I'd convinced myself I needed distance. Not forever. Not permanent exile. Just temporary space to investigate the prophecy's meaning, to understand what danger June might unknowingly represent, to prove to the Council and the other territories that I was handling this responsibly. It was strategic, logical, the right choice. I was lying to myself, but I didn't know that yet. June noticed immediately. The next evening, she came to find me in my study, where I was supposedly reviewing territorial reports, but actually just staring at the same page I'd been staring at for an hour. "Hey," she said from the doorway, smiling that warm smile that always made something in my chest tighten. "You didn't come to bed before sunrise. I didn't look up from the papers. Council meeting ran late. I needed to work through some things. Everything okay?" "Fine. Just political matters. Nothing interesting. Want to take a break? We could walk the gardens." "You said you'd help me identify that new night-blooming vine that appeared near the east wall, and I think it might be related to the species we saw in the conservatory last month, but the leaf structure is slightly different. So, maybe it's a hybrid or perhaps just a regional variation, and I wanted your opinion because you've seen so many more specimens than I have over the years. I have a territorial review due to the elders. By week's end, I should focus." She was quiet for a moment. "Oh, okay. I'll let you work then." Her footsteps retreated down the corridor, and I sat there hating myself, but convinced I was doing the necessary thing. The next night, I skipped our usual dinner together, sent Thomas to inform her I was handling urgent correspondence with the coastal territories. The night after that, I scheduled meetings during the hours we normally spent in the gardens. Small distances, careful absences, each one calculated to create space without causing outright alarm or hurt. But June wasn't stupid. On the fourth night, she appeared in my study doorway again, but this time, she didn't smile. She just stood there, arms crossed, watching me pretend to read documents. "Draco, what's going on?" "Nothing. I've been busy. You've been avoiding me for 4 days. I'm not avoiding you. I'm managing a territory of several thousand vampires. That requires constant attention, and I have responsibilities that existed long before you arrived and will continue long after you're gone. And sometimes that means I can't spend every evening in the gardens pretending the world beyond these walls doesn't exist." Bullshit. I looked up then, surprised by the bluntness. "Look at me," she said, her voice softer. "Please." I met her eyes, and the hurt there was like a physical blow. But beneath the hurt was something harder: determination, maybe. Or the beginning of anger. Did I do something wrong? No. Then what changed? 4 days ago, everything was fine. Now, you barely speak to me. You avoid our meals together. You schedule things during our time. So either tell me what I did, or tell me what's actually happening, because I'm not going to let you just ice me out without explanation. I should have prepared better for this conversation. Should have thought through what I'd say, but I'd been so focused on creating distance that I hadn't planned for what would happen when she confronted me about it. "There was a prophecy," I said, "at the council meeting. About you. About me." I told her everything. The exact words Miriam had spoken. The reaction of the other kings and queens. The elders' council. The implications of a seer's prophecy being ignored. She stood there, absorbing it, her face very still. Then she said, "So they think I'm going to destroy your territory somehow?" The prophecy was specific. The end of this bloodline, this dynasty, this territory as all know it. "But you don't believe that." She said it as a statement, but her eyes made it a question. I don't know what to believe. The look on her face, I'll remember that look until the end of my existence. Like I'd reached into her chest and squeezed her heart in my fist. "You think I could hurt you? Not intentionally. But prophecies don't work that way. You could be a catalyst, An unknowing trigger for events that spiral beyond control. Your very presence might attract enemies or create vulnerabilities or somehow set in motion a chain of circumstances that leads to exactly what the prophecy predicted, even though you never meant any harm and would never consciously choose to cause destruction. So, what do you want to do? I need time to understand what this means, to investigate whether there's any truth to the threat, or if it's being misinterpreted, to consult with scholars and historians who might have insight into similar prophecies, to determine what precautions might be necessary to prevent whatever end the seer foresaw. You need time. She laughed, but it was bitter and sharp. You have eternity, Draco. I have maybe 60 more human years if I'm lucky, probably less. Time isn't something I have excess of. That's not what I meant. No, I get it. The prophecy scared you. Fine. Prophecies are scary. But you're pulling away from me based on something that might not even mean what you think it means, based on vague words from a seer who collapsed before she could explain. I'm trying to protect everyone involved, including you, because if something happens to my territory because of our relationship, then you'll be blamed and targeted and possibly killed, and I can't let that happen. You're trying to protect your territory, your dynasty, your bloodline, all the things that existed for 800 years before I showed up and will probably exist for 800 more after I'm gone and turned to dust. That's not fair. She stepped into the room then, and I could see tears gathering in her eyes, though her voice stayed steady. No, you know what's not fair? What's not fair is that you made me fall in love with you. You invited me into your world, into your life, made me believe we had a future together. You asked me to give up my humanity, to become like you, to spend eternity in this castle. And then the first time something threatened that future, you pulled away. You didn't fight for us. You didn't trust me. You just retreated into your king persona and treated me like a political problem instead of a partner. I was quiet because, what could I say? She was right about all of it. I would have helped you investigate the prophecy, she continued, tears spilling over now. I would have worked with you to figure out what it meant and how to prevent any negative outcomes. I would have faced it together with you, whatever it was. I would have consulted with you about what steps to take and what precautions might be necessary and how to prove to the council that I wasn't a threat. But you shut me out. You decided unilaterally that distance was the answer, and you never asked me what I thought. You never gave me a choice in how we handled this. You just started avoiding me like I was something dangerous that needed to be kept at arm's length. That's what hurts the most, Draco. Not the prophecy. Not even that you got scared. Fear is human, and you're allowed to be afraid even after 800 years. What hurts is that you forgot I was your partner. You forgot we were supposed to be in this together. I'm sorry, I said, inadequate words for immeasurable damage. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. A gesture so heartbreakingly human. It made me ache. I know you are. But sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't undo 2 months of coldness and distance and treating me like I'm dangerous when all I ever did was love you. She pulled something from her pocket, a silver bracelet I'd given her months ago, inscribed with old vampiric words, Lumea, mea untunicata, my dark world. She'd worn it every day since I gave it to her. She set it gently on my desk. I hope you find peace, Draco. I hope the prophecy turns out to be nothing. I hope your territory thrives and your dynasty continues for another 1,000 years. I genuinely mean that, but I can't stay here wondering when you'll decide I'm too much of a risk again. I can't live in a castle where the person I love most treats me like a stranger. I deserve better than that, and deep down, I think you know it. She turned and walked out. No dramatic goodbye, no asking me to stop her. Just quiet dignity and the soft sound of her footsteps fading away. I sat there staring at that silver bracelet. and I understood with perfect clarity that I'd just lost something irreplaceable. Not because of a prophecy, not because of duty or fear or caution, because I'd chosen wrong. I let her go, told myself it was for the best. That distance would keep her safe and my territory secure, and everyone would be better off in the long run. I was wrong about that too. The weeks after June left were like living underwater. Everything muted and distant and harder to move through. I went through the motions of ruling, attending meetings, making decisions, signing documents, but it was all mechanical, automated. The castle felt cavernous and empty, despite having the same number of residents it had always had. The east wing, where June had kept her laboratory, was closed off. I couldn't bring myself to go in there, to see her abandoned plants and empty workspace. Thomas and Marcus tried to engage me in conversations about non-political matters. Alessia brought news from the other territories, trying to distract me with gossip and intrigue. I appreciated their efforts, but couldn't summon the energy to care. 3 months after June left, King Alexander visited my territory for what he called a diplomatic check-in, but was clearly a wellness check. "You look terrible," he said bluntly when we met in my private study. "I'm fine. You're grieving. There's a difference. I'm managing my territory effectively. All reports show that governance continues without disruption, and there have been no complaints from the populace or challenges from rival territories. So by any objective measure, I'm performing my duties adequately. Draco, we've known each other 400 years. Don't lie to someone who's watched you grow up." I slumped back in my chair, too exhausted to maintain the pretense. "What do you want me to say?" "That you made a mistake, that you let fear override love, that you're miserable without her. All of those things are true. Then fix it. Go to her. Apologize. Beg if you have to. The prophecy still exists. The threat is still unknown. The elders still expect me to investigate and determine what danger she might pose to my territory." "You're hiding behind that prophecy," he said, not unkindly. "You're using it as justification for your fear of vulnerability. I've seen it before. Ancient vampires who convince themselves that caring too deeply is dangerous, that distance equals safety, that isolation is strength. You're wrong about me. Am I? How many times in 800 years have you let someone close? How many times have you risked your heart?" He leaned forward, his ancient eyes seeing too much. "Once. You've done it once. With June. And the moment it became complicated, you retreated behind duty and protocol and the excuse that you were protecting everyone when really you were just protecting yourself from the possibility of loss." "That's not what happened. You don't have to admit it to me," he said, standing. "But you should at least admit it to yourself." He left me with that uncomfortable truth, and I spent the next several nights examining it. Was he right? Was I hiding behind duty and prophecy because vulnerability terrified me more than any external threat? Maybe. Probably. Yes. 6 months passed, then 8, then 12, then 18. A year and a half since June had walked out of my study with quiet dignity, leaving only a silver bracelet and the wreckage of what we'd built together. I ruled my territory, maintained order, enforced the ancient laws, met with the council, and assured them I was handling the prophecy threat appropriately by maintaining distance from the human woman in question. Everything was as it should be. Everything was hollow. 18 months after June left, Seer Miriam requested an audience. My heart, metaphorical, useless, leapt at the news. Perhaps she'd had another vision. Perhaps she could clarify the original prophecy, explain what it actually meant, give me some path forward that didn't involve this endless gray existence. She arrived at sunset, looking frail and ancient in the torchlight of my throne room. But her eyes, when she lifted them to mine, were clear and sharp. King Draco. "I've come to speak of the prophecy. Please, I'll take any clarity you can offer." She settled onto a bench, moving with the careful deliberateness of extreme age. I've meditated on the vision for 18 months now, consulted the threads of time, the branching possibilities, the paths that were, and the paths that might have been. I understand it better now. What did you see? I asked, leaning forward. The end I spoke of, it is not destruction. It is transformation. The human woman, June Winters, would have fundamentally changed your territory had you embraced the bond between you. Changed how? Your rule has always been traditional, isolated. You maintain the old boundaries between human and vampire, enforce the separation accord strictly, govern with a firm hand that mirrors your predecessors and their predecessors before them. You preserve the ancient ways without question or innovation. June would have softened that. Her presence would have encouraged alliance building with human communities, cultural exchange between species, scientific collaboration on projects that benefit both vampires and mortals, a gradual dissolution of the barriers that keep our kinds separate. She would have inspired you to see beyond tradition, to question whether the old ways serve us anymore or simply persist because they always have. That doesn't sound like an end. That sounds like evolution. To those who benefit from the current structure, evolution feels like ending, Miriam said. The old families, the highborn who take pride in pure bloodlines that stretch back millennia, the traditionalists who believe separation is the only guarantee of safety to them. Integration with humans would be the end of vampire culture as they know it, the end of the rigid hierarchy that places them at the top, the end of the separation accords that have governed our society for 2 centuries. But it would also be the beginning of something new, a territory where humans and vampires coexist openly, contributing their different strengths to shared goals. Were-turned-vampires are fully equal to born blood, because what matters is character and capability rather than lineage. Where the rigid hierarchy that has governed our kind for millennia begins to soften into something more flexible and merit-based. So the prophecy wasn't about June destroying my territory. It was about her transforming it into something unprecedented. Yes, and the transformation would have been gradual, gentle, led by you because she inspired you to see possibilities you'd never considered. Your bloodline would have ended because you would have adopted human customs of leadership, perhaps even chosen a successor based on merit rather than blood relation, breaking the centuries-old tradition of dynastic inheritance. The territory, as all know it, would have evolved into something the other kings and queens would find either inspiring or threatening, depending on their own beliefs. Frightening to the conservative elements who cling to the old ways, revolutionary to the progressive ones who've long questioned whether our society could be better, but ultimately beneficial to the vast majority of vampires and humans who would have lived under such an arrangement. I sat back, the weight of her words crushing me. So I destroyed us over a misinterpretation. I destroyed the woman I loved and the future we could have built because I heard end and assumed catastrophe when it might have meant renaissance. You destroyed your relationship over fear, she corrected. The prophecy was true. June would have ended things. You simply assumed ending meant disaster when it might have meant evolution. She stood, preparing to leave, then paused. There is one more thing you should know, King Draco. What? The threads of time show me probabilities, not certainties. But the highest probability now is that June Winters will live a full human life, find love again with someone of her own species, and die peacefully, at an old age, having never known what might have been, had you chosen differently. And you will reign for centuries more, respected and feared, your territory stable and traditional and unchanged. You will have exactly what you thought you wanted when you pushed her away. Power, security, the old ways preserved without disruption. She looked at me with something like pity. But you will never again feel what you felt with her. That kind of connection comes once in a vampire's long existence, if at all. Most of us never experience it, even once. You had it, and you let fear destroy it. She left me alone in the throne room with that prophecy, the real one, the one that mattered more than any words about territories and dynasties. I spent 3 days debating what to do. Pride warred with regret. Duty wrestled with desire. Fear of rejection battled hope for reconciliation. The possibility that I was too late, that she'd moved on completely, that showing up now would only disrupt whatever peace she'd found. Finally, I decided I'd go to her. Apologize for everything. The distance, the coldness, the way I'd treated her like a threat instead of a partner. Explain the prophecy's true meaning. Tell her that she was right about everything, that I'd been a coward hiding behind duty. Ask if there was any possibility, however small, of rebuilding what I'd destroyed. It took another 2 months to find her. She'd moved from the city where she'd lived before, covering her tracks effectively with the kind of thoroughness that suggested she didn't want to be found. Eventually, my sources located her in a small coastal town 3 territories away, living in a cottage near the sea in a community that existed in the neutral zone between vampire and human lands. I traveled there alone, arriving in the evening. The town was quaint, human-scaled, warm lights glowing in windows as families gathered for dinner. So different from my dark castle, my cold throne room, my vampire world of ancient stone and older traditions. I found her cottage easily, the one with the garden, naturally. Even in late autumn, flowers bloomed along the path, night-blooming varieties she'd cultivated with the knowledge she'd gained during her time in my gardens. I stood at the edge of her property, gathering courage, when I heard laughter from inside. Her laughter. That specific sound I'd memorized over 18 months together. The one that had brought warmth back into my existence. But she wasn't alone. Through the window, I could see her. She was in a small kitchen, cooking dinner with someone, a human man, probably around her age, with kind eyes and an easy smile. He said something that made her laugh again, and she swatted his arm playfully with a dish towel in a gesture of comfortable familiarity that spoke of time spent together, of inside jokes and shared routines. I watched as he pulled her into an embrace, gentle and easy, and she leaned into him with the kind of trust that comes from feeling completely safe. Watched as he kissed her forehead, and she smiled up at him with affection. Not the desperate, complicated love she'd felt for me, but something simpler, lighter. Something that didn't require her to give up her humanity, or navigate vampire politics, or wonder if she was a prophesied threat to an ancient dynasty. He was human. He could give her sunlight, mortality, normalcy, could give her a life without prophecies, or ancient seers, or the weight of 800-year-old baggage. Could give her the simple human existence she'd wanted those 5 years as mortal that had turned into her entire lifetime because I'd been too afraid to fight for us. They moved around the kitchen together with the choreography of people who'd learned each other's rhythms, and I realized they'd probably been together for over a year now. Long enough for the relationship to be established, comfortable, real. Long enough that my appearance would be a disruption rather than a rescue. I stood there in the darkness, watching the woman I loved find happiness with someone who could give her what I couldn't: simplicity, safety, a future without fear or prophecy or ancient political complications. A partner who wouldn't push her away the moment things became difficult. And I realized that Seer Miriam was right. June would live her full human life, love someone worthy of her, grow old naturally the way she'd always wanted. She'd gotten those 5 years she'd asked for, except now it would be 50 years or 60 if she was lucky. She'd get her whole mortal lifetime, not just 5 more years before transformation into a vampire. She'd escape the vampire world and all its complications. Escape the weight of prophecies and council politics and ancient expectations. Escaped me and my fear and my inability to choose her when it mattered most. She'd won, in a way. She was free. And I had my territory, my throne, my dynasty unchanged, my bloodline preserved, everything I'd thought I was protecting when I pushed her away. Everything except the one thing that had actually mattered. I could go to her door, could knock, could explain about the prophecy's true meaning, about Miriam's clarification, about how sorry I was. Could tell her that I understood now what I destroyed, that she'd been right about everything, that I'd let fear override love in the most catastrophic way possible. Could ask for another chance to build the future we'd planned, to create the transformed territory that Miriam had foreseen, to spend eternity together the way we'd once imagined. But watching her laugh in that warm kitchen with golden lamplight and the smell of human cooking, seeing her relaxed and happy in a way she'd stopped being during those final months in my castle when I'd treated her like a problem instead of a partner, how selfish would it be to disrupt that? To pull her back into my dark world when she'd finally found light? To ask her to risk her heart again on someone who'd already broken it once? She deserved this, deserved happiness without complications. Deserved someone who wouldn't let fear override love. Deserved a partner who would choose her first, every time, without hesitation. Deserved better than a vampire king who'd taken 18 months to realize he'd made a mistake. I turned and left before she could see me. Walked back through the quiet town, through territories and forests, back to my castle, back to my throne, back to the immortal existence I'd chosen over her. Marcus was waiting in my study when I returned 3 nights later. "Did you find her?" "Yes." "And?" "She's happy, Marcus. She's with someone who can give her a normal life. Someone who won't burden her with prophecies and ancient politics and the weight of vampire tradition. Someone who probably tells her he loves her every day and means it without qualification or fear." "So you didn't talk to her?" "No. Draco, you can't just give up without even trying to explain or apologize or ask if there's any possibility of reconciliation after all this time." "She's better off," I said, cutting him off. "She's living the life she should be living. Mortal, simple, safe, without vampire complications, without me. And you're just going to accept that? Going to let her go without even fighting for her?" "I already let her go, Marcus. 18 months ago when I pushed her away because I was too afraid to risk my heart." This was just confirmation that I can't undo what I've done. Some mistakes are too big, some damage too complete. He looked at me with disappointment and sadness, but he didn't argue further. What could he say? We both knew I was right. Some mistakes can't be unmade. Some endings are permanent. Some chances, once lost, never return. That was 20 months ago, Helena. 20 months of ruling my territory, managing the eternal political machinations of vampire society, maintaining order and tradition. 20 months of existing in this castle where every room holds memories of her, the gardens where we first met, the library where she studied my ancient texts, the east wing that still holds her abandoned plants, now dried and withered beyond saving. Everything is exactly as it was before June Winters walked into my garden with her notebook and her fearless smile, and her belief that the night could be a choice rather than a curse. My dynasty is secure. My bloodline continues unchanged. My territory operates under the same laws and customs it has for centuries. The separation accords remain in force. The rigid hierarchy stands unquestioned. The old ways are preserved. The Council of Elders is satisfied that I handled the prophecy threat appropriately. The other territory kings have stopped watching me with suspicion and judgment. I'm King Draco Nightshade, respected and feared, powerful and immortal, and utterly alone, and I am completely, irreversibly empty. The prophecy came true after all, just not in the way anyone expected. June Winters was the end of me, not my destruction, but the end of any possibility I had for genuine connection, the end of my capacity for vulnerability, the end of whatever humanity I'd managed to retain over 800 years of existence, the end of hope. She didn't destroy my territory, she destroyed my heart, and I helped her do it. I chose duty over love, caution over courage, fear over faith, isolation over transformation. I chose wrong. And now I sit in this castle, in this study where she once stood with tears in her eyes, asking me to trust her, surrounded by centuries of accumulated power and knowledge. And I understand something I never grasped before. Power means nothing without someone to share it with. Immortality is just endless time to regret your mistakes. All the wisdom of centuries can't protect you from the simple truth that love requires bravery, and I was a coward. Write that down, Helena. Write it clearly so there's no ambiguity or room for misinterpretation. Let this biography be a warning to any vampire who reads it and thinks themselves above such mortal concerns as love and loss and the risk of emotional devastation. We're not above them. We're not immune. We just have longer to live with our regrets, longer to remember what we destroyed, longer to exist in the hollow aftermath of our own fear. June Winters taught me that the night has its own ecosystem, that darkness can be a choice rather than a curse, that flowers can bloom without sunlight if they're tended with care. But I've learned something else in the months since she left, something I wish I'd understood before it was too late. Some choices, once made, define everything that follows. Some endings can't be prevented, only accepted. Some losses hollow you out so completely that you spend the rest of your immortal existence as a monument to what you destroyed, a warning to others. A cautionary tale. I am King Draco Nightshade. I rule the Northern Territories with firm hand and ancient authority. I have everything a vampire could want: power that spans centuries, wealth that could buy kingdoms, respect that borders on fear, immortality. That means I'll exist long after everyone currently alive has turned to dust. Except the one thing that ever made any of it matter. That's the story, Helena. That's the biography you asked for. Not the tale of conquest and glory everyone expects when they hear about an 800-year-old vampire king. Not the list of territories conquered or enemies defeated or treaties negotiated, but the truth about power and love and the way fear can destroy both. I had everything. Power, immortality, a love that comes once in 1,000 years if at all, a woman who saw past the monster to the man, a partner who would have walked beside me through transformation and revolution and the creation of something unprecedented, a future that could have changed not just my territory but perhaps all of vampire society. And I let fear turn it all to ash because I couldn't distinguish between caution and cowardice, between protection and rejection, between duty and the excuse I used to avoid risk. Write it down, every word, every detail of how spectacularly I failed. Because if I can't have June, if I can't fix what I've broken, if I'm condemned to spend centuries existing without ever truly living again, then at least let my mistakes serve as a lesson. Let it be a warning, carved in words instead of stone. Love is terrifying. Vulnerability is dangerous. Opening your heart to someone means risking devastation so complete you'll carry the scars for centuries. The potential for loss is real. The possibility of pain is absolute. But the alternative, the safe, cautious, protected life I'm living now, is so much worse. It's not living at all. It's just existing, going through motions, performing a role, being a king without being a person, having everything except the only thing that makes everything else meaningful. I had 800 years to learn that lesson. 8 centuries to understand that love matters more than power, that connection is worth the risk of loss, that transformation is better than stagnation, even when transformation is frightening. I learned it too late. I hope whoever reads this learns it faster. I hope they choose differently when fear and love stand before them demanding a decision. I hope they're braver than I was. That's all, Helena. That's the biography. Close the book. Tell whoever asks that King Draco Nightshade ruled wisely and well-maintained order and tradition, preserved his dynasty for future generations. Tell them he was everything a vampire king should be. And if anyone asks whether he was happy, tell them that happiness was never the point. Power was the point. Duty was the point. The continuation of ancient traditions was the point. Tell them that, and maybe they'll believe it. I don't anymore.